For tech, it's a time of introspection.
Elizabeth Warren used South by Southwest in Austin to take on big tech.
Then, on the streets of Austin, a plague of scooters. Is that the future of urban transportation?
And wearables have an unexpected and cool future.
I'm Steve Rosenbaum, and this is FuFWD.
And I'm DeRose. Steve, let's launch.
All right. And first of all, just for those of you who are sharing this podcast with your friends, please tell everybody we're on Stitcher, we're on Spotify, we're on Google Play. So now we need your help. So log in, vote, like us, all that good social stuff. We could use it.
Right. And the thing we always hear is the best thing you could do for us is give us a 5-star review or subscribe to us. And of course, big shout out to our friends at IEEE Spectrum. The Spectrum, it's the flagship magazine and website of the IEEE, the world's largest professional organization devoted to engineering and the applied sciences, and they do good tech journalism. So
they sure do. And we have a great story from them this week coming up. But first, we got to start with this. So the question is this just a moment of navel gazing that's going to pass? Or are we really starting to see the tech community, in particular the big platforms, having to come to terms with the fact that they've built something that's maybe not too big to fail?
I think that there's a few things going on. I do feel like instead of threats, which we heard in the months before and then especially after the Democrats took the House, and in the U.S. the idea was there might be legislation coming. It was all vague and inchoate, for a while. And so we're going to talk about Elizabeth Warren. We're going to talk about Kamala Harris, both coming out with specifics. So I think that matters a lot. When you say, are they navel gazing? I'm still not sure I see it. We heard last week and mentioned that Zuck, talked about maybe going private with the network, private sharing. We'll see. I think the rubber has not hit the road yet, and we're just going to have to see what really matters to them in terms of playing nice politically versus stuff that might affect their bottom line.
So I'm going to disagree with you there. I actually think, don't get me wrong. I started believing not believing the Zuckerberg we're going private thing, but then I've since spoken to some people internally and also read the reports of some of the major execs who've stepped down or are leaving the company, and they're really, the thing you need to know is he has access to data that tells him a story about how users behave on the platform that is, much more nuanced than we're ever going to get. So this thing that you and I are sensing, that some of our friends are not using it as much, that there isn't, like, it seems like just the engagement in my community is down a bunch.
Right.
Things that I used to post that would get 50 or 100 likes now get 25 or 30. So maybe I'm just being boring, but I don't think it's that. I think it's people saying, you know what, oversharing, and look, and we, which brings us kind of, somewhat maybe urgently, to what happened in New Zealand. Yeah. I mean, here's a strategic mass murderer who goes and puts on a helmet rig to live stream his murderous spree. And it takes...
Poor GoPro, by the way, always gets thrown into this thing willy-nilly, even though they're not the network or anything else. But you kept hearing he had a GoPro camera on, right. But it was really about Facebook.
And it took them 17 minutes to shut it down.
Yeah. I mean, look, this is... You and I talked before we went on the air, and Facebook is, for better or worse, the global town square at this point. And so this kind of stuff intersects with them regardless. The fact that this kind of thing happens, that there was a before, during, and after with this particular homegrown terrorist, right? So things get brewed in Facebook or online. There's a real time, I'm going to do this, or a warning, and then it's either happening or there's an aftermath. And it's really interesting. It took them that long to shut it down. I think Facebook still hasn't figured out what do they do with the legacy presence or site or everything else. Those things tend to be shut down, but even that doesn't make sense, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. On the Sunday morning talk shows, there was discussion of, maybe the the idea of live streaming needs to have a 5-minute delay or some kind of a delay on it. And would anyone care if everything was delayed?
People would care a lot. I think it's really? Name who would care? There's a concert going on in Central Park, and here's the video 5 minutes ago. You wouldn't even know it's delayed. Oh, well, there's that. Absolutely, there is that. FYI, I watch a lot of college basketball, a lot of sports, and ESPN has always had a very strong presence with their mobile app that streams that stuff. 5 to 7 second delay all the time. Not for the reasons you're talking about, but I guess to underscore that maybe you're right. Nobody cares. Nobody knows. It's only when I suddenly zip over to the TV that I notice even that there's a difference. But I don't know. I feel like, Steve, there's a real-time aspect to things that are going on. This stuff intersects with phone calls. There's a lot of unforeseen things that I'm not sure.
Right, but let's put so long as we're going to go down this road for a minute, what Zuckerberg. So a couple of things internally at Facebook, they're talking about bringing together WhatsApp and Instagram and Facebook into a single unified platform. That's and if you look at the power of messaging in terms of WeChat, for example, to be able to be a payment platform and a like it's almost as if the public sharing part of it is just more trouble than it's worth. And if all of that stuff, the Instagram guys were on stage at South by, and they were very careful to say nothing about the mothership. Very careful.
Yeah, although there was a good joke in one of our syllabus articles for this week where they one of them, Systrom, I think, said maybe we'll get our jobs back when asked about the Warren thing and about breaking them up. So it's just interesting. Like, first of all, what does she mean? We'll get back to what you were talking about. What does she mean by breaking them up? Breaking them up into pieces? Was he meaning Instagram's going to be independent again? It's that kind of stuff. But yeah. I don't know. I mean, merging those things together seems like a dubious thing to do in the first place too. Technically I get it, but
so
they're trying to drag the trendiness into the sort of two adult mothership.
Here's why I think it's a mistake not to take Mark seriously. There is no one on the planet that understands the complexity and the user behavior around mass market social media better than he does. Arguably he invented it. Yep. And he's running it, and it's not that other people don't have access to data, but he's able to look at certain signs and go, wait a minute, 3 years ago we were here, and these behaviors, Gene is now on the site for a minute, 15 seconds a day, and he used to be 6. And we've seen this downward slide of people in certain markets of certain backgrounds, or who are leaders in behavior, who tend to be ahead of the market, all curving downward. Look, but there's a reason why I'm saying that, because here's why, and this was cocktail party conversation last night at a thing I was at, and people were like, well, but he's never going to walk away from the revenue. I'm like, well, but that's the thing. Your personal conversations one-on-one with me or with your family or with whatever gives him just as much data to sell you ads, to put ads in front of you, as your public behavior.
Yeah, look, I don't disagree for a second with the substance of what you're saying. And my point more was that unlike 10 or 8 years ago, when he was making moves, bobbing and weaving ahead of the market, and arguably there wasn't as much focus, so, I mean, there's things we've forgotten about, like photos didn't used to be a part of it. Photo sharing he put in there. He did, the news feed, the timeline. I just think more recently in the last 3 or 4 years, as the pressure has gotten up a little bit, he seems to have moved a little reactionarily to where the press, and especially the pressure in relation to privacy and stuff. I mean, look, the guy's apologized a half a dozen times in the last 4 years for different things.
But we don't generally disagree, and I'm going to disagree with you. I think he's been seeing this for 6 months. I think he's been making plans to integrate the platform to go to private messaging. And I think internally they've had great big knockdown, drag out battles about it. And the people that lost those battles quit their jobs last week, So all right. So I guess what I'm saying,
we're disagreeing about whether we're disagreeing, because I'm emphasizing that I think we're agreeing. I believe truly that he's moving to where the business is and where the numbers are saying that, and that's part of a subset of this. I just don't think it's his original brilliance anymore, as much as stuff that might have come to him that what his company agree with.
So I was surprised that Elizabeth Warren took that stage in that audience to give a breakup tech speech. I would have thought that would have gone over like a lead balloon. It didn't. It wasn't, by the way. It didn't get it wasn't like warmly received. At least I wasn't in the room, so to be fair, maybe it was, but it didn't. But it has resonated, and it's continuing to echo around in some ways.
Yeah, well, look, first of all, she's a bulldog, right? So whenever she's done anything, she takes things head on. She's done it with Trump. She's done it with a couple of things that go back 5 or 7 years to when she was like coming from professorship into politics itself. And then the second thing, you know this because we've both been at South by so many times. It's a polyglot kind of demographic, and there's just as many people who abhor Facebook and the mainstream digital media and wouldn't mind seeing that as they broken up, as there are those that see it as a strike against tech in general. I find that her being a little flighty on this, though. I would love to hear if in any of the dialogue she's shown any detail, because other than Amazon maybe controlling so much of commerce that antitrust behavior is inevitable, I'm not sure where the antitrust basis is. I mean, you were on a panel with a guest of ours from a few weeks ago, but his point was a little more broad and symbolic of the entire, the Sherman antitrust side.
All right. So what about the Kamala Harris position?
So I'm never getting to that, because I think this is a brilliant as well as self-evident, which is to say, if anyone bothered to look closely at where you might have something notable to say or do in tech, you'd quickly come upon this sort of digital core that has been quietly building in the government over the last 5 or 7 years, going back to Obama. So her focusing on that makes her look like a real, practical, knowledgeable doer, whether it was handed to her or not. I want to know more, because it sounds promising to me.
All right, so let's wrap up this segment with here's my summary, and then you can tell me if I've overstated the case. I think people are now starting to get this queasy feeling that maybe this public network with no speed bumps to entry has some really potentially terrible social outcomes that are going to be very hard to solve with either human curators or AI, or it's like it doesn't seem like there's a fix that's anywhere near on the horizon. And maybe the answer is, the volume of inputs to a place like Facebook relative to what it would take to actually manage them. The thing that I think we know is that spammers and hate speechers and evildoers seem to be outrunning every system that's built at the moment.
I agree with that, which is and it's ironic, because for these big guys, and I think in this case we're talking about the social ones. We're talking about Facebook, Twitter, the ones whose social networks, do they even have control over their own technology / populace / business partners? That's a really big deal, and that speaks more to where the situation is broadly with digital and social. The one thing I would just say, if we're departing from this subject, is that, look, it's an election cycle towards the presidential that was kicked off with the end of the midterms and the new regime. A lot of this is going to be dictated by that, and the tacking left of the Democrats, which will happen all the way up until there's a nominee, and then they'll tack back towards the center, has a lot to do with this. One of our friends, Roger McNamee, was there talking about ironically, since he's a capital markets guy, that the biggest problem is that the public company thing of being about growth and profits and shareholder value has gone out of control, and that cornerstone of capitalism is the problem. So I think that's interesting too.
All right, so moving on to urban transportation. So,
look there, scooters.
I have to say this. When New York started building the city bike program, it was controversial in all kinds of ways. They were putting in all of these docks. The docks took away parking spaces. The drivers didn't like that. And I thought naively, during the summer, tourists will use it. Maybe during the warm weather, city people will use it. But mostly, like, who's going to bike in the winter, for God's sakes? I mean, it's cold. Turns out, if you go to any of the docks, there's one right around the corner from my house. They are used around, year round. Those bikes are on the street, and the city absorbed, I don't even know the number, and I should, tens of thousands of them into the commuting, traveling life of the city almost magically.
That's right. And with them feeling like they weren't even around enough or in enough places, right? I mean, yeah. I think you're completely correct with that.
So being in Austin and seeing the scooters, my first reaction was, this is a novelty. And then my second reaction as I looked around was, it was really clear to me in terms of using Austin and South by as a way to get us a new sampling of a new product. The uptake was spectacular.
Yeah, it seems like it was amazing. Look, we did part one last week on this, and the coda to it is lots of piles of them laying around, which I think you both saw and maybe are going to share some photos of. I mentioned to you last week that Amsterdam is really the big granddaddy, the famous global phenomena. And it's interesting as you go from that old example that's been there forever through the New York kinds of examples to the scooters, you go from low tech to high tech. I don't know if we'll be able to pull together a photo, but there's thousands of them, of the pile of old borrow them, use them, drop them at the Amsterdam train station. And that's what I thought of when I saw your but that's a big difference because those things they're not as toxic as a scooter. This sounds like there's something that's almost I don't know if it's going to get accepted in the form in which it's happening right now.
Look, in New York today, the number of scooters on the street approaches zero.
Yeah.
Right? Zero. So there's zero, maybe there's three. I've never seen one. But it, and some of it comes down to, having, you can't come to New York with a small number of scooters if you're any of these brands. You have to come with tens of thousands. The idea that they have no they have no official place in the urban landscape. So, I mean, the idea that you can kind of drop them seems, like, I don't even know.
It's unrealistic. I think it's unrealistic that it can happen, right? I don't think just curbs in Manhattan is an issue with something like a scooter, like where they would be that wouldn't get in the way of the foot traffic and the, I mean, how did that work in Austin? I mean, Austin, the one thing about Austin is during South by is it's a foot traffic kind of thing, right? They had those cart services and things like that. But you felt like thousands of people were roaming on foot in the streets that like either didn't allow or just had few cars on them. Like, it's just not the same analog, is it? No, were you on a scooter at any point during the week?
No. My take on, to be honest, I've never really ridden one. And I didn't want to, and I had my camera and stuff with me. And I didn't really want to experiment with it. And it wasn't like I was going to have someone say to me, here's where the start button is, here's where the power button is, and there's no helmet. And I was like, and now I will tell you that the one time I considered it was very late at night when I was, a mile away from my hotel. And after a couple of drinks, I was tired. And I was like, boy, I could just scooter back. And I'm like, what a terrible idea that is. Drunken scootering seems like a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, better than being in a car, I guess. Although not better than getting somebody's Uber.
But here's the future forward take on this.
Yeah.
I think we are seeing the end of automobiles owning the urban landscape, whether it's bicycles or scooters or I thought back to the Segway era, and I thought, boy, the Segway guys, they were sure they were going to take over and they ran into all kinds of urban legislative issues with, where do you park them? How do you get them in the elevator? Can you take them to work? All that stuff. But scooters, in a strange way, they seem small and harmless enough that you can tuck them under your arm if you have to take it up to your office. I don't know.
It's a big deal. No, I agree with that. In fact, to my mind, I thought scooter would depart from the model because it would be cheap enough and compact enough that you could just have your own, rather than this idea. I mean, maybe you would argue cheap means share them and it doesn't matter. But I just don't understand how that would. New York is a terrible version of not being an example that scales to everywhere. You leave a piece of cardboard on the street in New York and somebody steals it. It's just a weird place compared to the rest of the world, and not a good case study for these kinds of things. Austin, I think, is a good one.
All right, last thing on the scooter front is that along the way, Bird, which is this scooter company of some note, it laid off 5% of its workforce. What does that mean?
What does that mean? It's impossible to sort of understand. I mean, there's also the idea that Uber and Lyft and others are kind of sniffing around this area, and so maybe they couldn't possibly contend with that sort of a thing. But I don't. That's a big stretch to sort of bring bicycles and scooters and self-travel into the world of what used to just be displacing taxis and car services.
All right. So last segment for the show, let's talk about wearables. So this is the IEEE article from March 14th. And I have to say, my bad, but I thought wearables were basically just footstep tracking and sleep tracking, and kind of that was kind of it. And it turns out I was wrong. It's a big growing sector.
It certainly is. Look, in the world of Internet of Things with intelligence and even the capabilities of phones with accessories, it was inevitable. I tend to think of it this way. There's health and fitness, which are two categories but are overlapping. And then there's everything else. Like I kind of get a little antsy and frustrated when it's all kind of lumped together, because I do feel like there is no doubt about it that the fact that you're wearing a wristwatch and being able to track the heart rate very easily is immediately a departure to so many applications. And so I do feel like that stuff and the progress that's been made in the fitness stuff is a big deal. But it is interesting that some of the articles we're looking at are about mind reading and vision and other kinds of things. I mean, did you feel beyond that article that there was much discussion of it at South by? Or is this sort of an extra South by kind of thing?
This is extra. I mean, there might have been, but not in the tracks that I was on. That being said, though, let's talk about the MindX product.
Let's talk about that. Absolutely, because that's a visual search, which is in the woman's article from IEEE, has been discussed for 25 years. But mind reading, it's I don't know.
So the author is Tekla Perry, and a longtime editor at IEEE. But when they say mind reading, is that just meant to be buzzy and fun, or do they actually mean you think something and the wearable acts?
Well, I think it's assumptions based on kind of simplistic, quote unquote, mind reading, which is kind of impulse and where your eyes go and things like that. And so I just think the margin for error on what it is you'd be thinking or reacting to, or electrical impulses are at a higher rate in your mind, or like sure it's mind reading is a little bit of a false description, but certainly brain reading maybe is what they are starting to do. It seems like I'm skeptical.
So you mean it's like Amazon? Instead of saying Alexa, turn on the lights, you think Alexa, turn on the lights? Is that it?
I guess so. Hey, look, when in reading the article, one of the first things I thought of, and then thought, hey, it's been around for 50 years, are things like lie detector tests, right? I mean, when you think about that, like, well, what is that? That sort of increased heart rate somehow means you're lying or nervous or something. At a certain level, I could understand, that. It would be nice if my, hey Google, stop. It's going to answer me again. Or Alexa could start picking up the nervousness in your voice and say, "Is everything okay?" That, like, I have a feeling you are going to see things like that soon.
So one of the things in the article talks about glasses that are goggles that modulate chronic pain.
I have to say, I didn't 100% understand it because the detail wasn't necessarily there in the article. I'm aware of how sound machines have been able to do that, and so maybe there are vibrations or pulses that the glasses gave you, but yeah.
There was research. If you click through, there was research that around the article, but it was just then it got super geeky super fast for me. I was like, whoa.
Right, which I actually love about IEEE because they do a good job at traversing, but you can end up in deep engineering waters without knowing it if you click fast. So here's, I think, maybe the thing I took from the article that I hadn't thought about, and from a future forward perspective. Wearables, if you think that wearables are simply to track footsteps or stair climbs, or I guess the next level is potential heart rate, heart attack signals, or blood sugar if you're diabetic. Don't think narrowly about that device as a way to measure basic body functions or check your email. It's actually going to be much more about checking things that you currently don't think about at all. Like there was the idea that wearables could check the your sweat glands. Right. Yeah. I think that's a big. Some of that sounds very credible and real, and that makes sense to me. I don't know, how much of this stuff is local. One of the things I wouldn't have found myself thinking about 2 years ago about wearables, but now we're also immersed in it, is privacy and somebody intercepting your signals and your health, and how is all that going to work? It's boy.
Wasn't there a story about Dick Cheney being all freaked out about people being able to hack his pacemaker?
I don't remember that story, but it sounds perfect.
All right, so we are out of time. It's been an excellent program and really fun to talk to you and think about. Yeah. I mean, so to recap, platforms are going to go through some kind of change. I'm betting that they're going to all flip to privacy. Gene is slightly less urgent about that, but I'm reading the Zuckerberg body language. I think there's big changes ahead. On the streetwise stuff, there's going to be scooters everywhere, and they're going to be crazy and insane, but unstoppable.
Hey, maybe it'll make us healthier so that we can wear more wearables.
Then that's a good one. Can you think to your wearable, I want my scooter to go faster, and will it automatically speed up?
Well, that makes sense to me. If the eye tracking thing becomes, we know about what happens with those headsets where you can shoot guns with, by looking at things and stuff like that. So I don't know. It's why we're doing what we're doing, because the future can come really fast and sometimes maybe not as fast. And all we're doing is trying to help see what the 2020 can tell us versus the 2100.
All right, everybody. Have a good week. We'll see you next week. Future forward, onward.
All right. Glad to have you back in New York, Steve.
Bye-bye.